opening statement. Okay, let's find the opening statement. First off, I want to thank all of you. Apparently, you've all done just a terrific job working with our different staffs in educating us. You've seen our idiosyncrasies of wanting you to fixate on the things where we can actually make some policy changes that actually make a difference. So, look, for 6+ years, because of the quirkiness of our office, we've been introducing AI bills, audit the Pentagon, using technology, using a crawler to find out where assets are. Healthcare, if over the next decade, interest in healthcare are the primary drivers of US sovereign debt, could we actually still protect the quality of healthcare, maybe even make it better, but using technology to deal with those cost drivers? And I know sometimes that makes people very uncomfortable, but there was also a time that going to Blockbuster Video was the family ritual on Fridays, and today you hit a button. So now I'd like to introduce our distinguished witnesses. You all get to be distinguished. Dr. Sterling Thomas is the Chief Scientist at the Government Accountability Office. He leads the work conducted by GAO Scientist, Technology Assessment, and Analytics team, which provides information to Congress on emerging technologies and their application in government. Prior to his appointment at the GAO, Dr. Thomas served as Chief Scientist at Novus, a nonprofit research institute where he applied machine learning and artificial intelligence to his research on synthetic biology. Okay, you already realize you just like doubled the IQ of, never mind. Dr. Brian Miller is a practicing hospitalist and professor of medicine and business at Johns Hopkins, and somewhat of a friend. Dr. Miller is also a non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he researches and focuses on healthcare competition, FDA policy, public health, and integration of AI into the healthcare system. The doctor is head of AI policy at the Abundance Institute. Oh, sorry. Did I just, forgive me. Is it called the Abundance Institute? His research focuses on how artificial intelligence can be used to maximize innovation and advance human interest. Previously, he was the chief technologist at the Federal Trade Commission, where his work focused on economics of data privacy and blockchain. We should talk. I worked on blockchain before coming to this. Now I'd like to turn over to the ranking member to introduce the Democrat witness.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And after I introduce the witness, I have a couple of opening remarks, if that makes sense.
Why don't you go straight to opening remarks, because you may get stressed with having to vote on.
Okay, and then I will introduce Mr. Canarsa. So I just really want to thank you for calling today's hearing on a really important topic, and to your point, a topic that has a lot of bipartisan interest and a lot of bipartisan potential. As this is the first JEC hearing this Congress, I also want to say how much I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, in your new role as chair of the committee and my new role as ranking member. I really look forward to working together, and I've appreciated our conversations so far. And I'm glad we're starting out with a topic that we can find some real common ground on, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse through the use of innovation. I also want to thank the 4 witnesses for testifying before the committee and sharing your expertise on this topic. We need to keep working together across the aisle to save taxpayer dollars by reducing waste, fraud, and abuse. As we will discuss in today's hearing, there are many ways to do so by embracing new technologies and better data analytics. These types of tools can help an investigator identify potential fraud or a caseworker streamline an application process. I know that all 4 of our witnesses today will outline ways that the government can better deploy technology. I really look forward to building off these ideas moving forward. Before we get to the introduction of our witness, though, I do want to just note my serious concerns with the reckless action so far of Elon Musk and DOGE. Whether the government is providing health care for veterans, Social Security checks for seniors, or loans for small businesses, we should continually strive to improve the taxpayer experience. But Mr. Musk's slash and burn tactics are doing the opposite. In addition, I want to bring the committee's attention to the fact that the administration's decision to fire 17 inspectors general who investigate fraud, that's what they do, is completely counterproductive to the goal of improving government efficiency. I firmly believe that we should be cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, and that we can do so without making life harder for children, families, and seniors all across our country. I hope that conversations, including the one we will have this afternoon, can help us chart a better path forward. So again, I thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses for agreeing to testify today, and happy to proceed with the introduction. Mr. Andrew Canarsa is the Executive Director of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. That's an independent part of the executive branch focused on supporting the work of Inspectors General. Prior to his current role, Mr. Canarsa served in the Social Security Administration Office of the Inspector General from 2009 to 2023. Welcome, Mr. Canarsa. I really look forward to your testimony, as I do the testimony of all our witnesses.
Thank you, Senator. And please don't be discombobulated if you see members popping up and popping down. It is the nature of being here during a fairly chaotic time. Dr. Thomas, please, 5 minutes, educate us.
All right. Chairman Schweikert, Ranking Member Hassan, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to participate today in today's hearing to discuss how AI can be used to reduce waste, fraud, and improper payments. As GAO's chief scientist and throughout my career in industry, in academia, and in the intelligence community, I've seen great advancements in data science. These innovations offer exciting opportunities to improve government efficiency. As you know, GAO is a nonpartisan watchdog for Congress. We have expanded our science technology team in recent years, and it includes a team of data scientists. We know firsthand from their work that AI holds great promise in furthering GAO's mission and your goal of safeguarding taxpayer dollars. My aim today is to offer 3 important actions that will help us reach that goal. First, we must continue and augment our traditional anti-fraud efforts. Second, we must apply AI thoughtfully and ensure that we use quality data to mitigate its well-known risks. And third, we must ensure that the federal workforce has the skills they need to apply new innovations like AI. Regarding my first point, GAO has a large body of work on fraud and improper payments in the federal government. Last month, one of my colleagues testified before House Appropriations on this topic. The federal government reported an estimated $162 billion in payment errors or improper payments during fiscal year 2024, and that is almost certainly an underestimate. We have outlined numerous ways that Congress and federal agencies can tackle this problem with existing capabilities. For example, Congress could make permanent the Social Security Administration's authority to share its death list with Treasury's do not pay system. These traditional methods are routinely preventing and detecting fraud. By enhancing them, we can save taxpayer dollars today without any new technology. But on my second point, I am optimistic about innovation, but we must be thoughtful about it. In data science, we often say garbage in, garbage out. Nowhere is that more true than with AI and machine learning. If we start trying to identify fraud and improper payments with so-so data, we're going to get so-so results. Broad use AI is still at early stages of development and implementation, and rapid deployment without thoughtful design has led already to unintended consequences. Before pouring data science on the problem, we need solid, reliable, ground truth data and a human in the loop to ensure data reliability and application of this technology. GAO has an AI accountability framework which lays out these and other principles. One piece of advice that emerges from such principles is to find a solution that produces the desired result with the least complexity. For example, in response to our recommendation, the Small Business Administration screened all PPP or Paycheck Protection Program loans made before September 20 with a rules-based tool. It was just looking for indicators. It wasn't using AI. And they still identified $4.7 billion in loans that went to ineligible recipients or were used for unauthorized purposes. And those loans were not forgiven. To build on that success, we need more innovation in government. In 2022, we recommended that one way to do that, Congress could establish a permanent analytics center of excellence to unlock tools that more efficiently identify and prevent fraud and improper payments. My final point is that harnessing innovation also requires a federal workforce that has the right skills. but agencies continue to face barriers in hiring, managing, and retaining staff with advanced technical skills. This is another area where GAO has made recommendations. And we have explored innovative big picture ideas like establishing a digital services academy. Rapid advances in AI capabilities hold great promise. GAO believes that the federal government can and must simultaneously realize those opportunities and do so upon a firm foundation of reliable data and a digitally skilled workforce. Chairman Schweikert and Ranking Member Hassan and members of the committee, thank you, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Dr. Miller.
Chairman Schweikert, Vice Chairman Schmidt, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to join you and share my views on how AI and technology can improve government efficiency and reduce fraud, waste, and abuse. I'm going to focus on operational solutions targeting the Medicare and Medicaid programs, recognizing that these comprise over $1.5 trillion in annual spending. I should note that today I'm here in my personal capacity, and the views expressed are my own and don't necessarily reflect those of Johns Hopkins University, the American Enterprise Institute, the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, or the North Carolina State Health Plan. That aside, ethos of DOGE, asking questions, re-engineering processes, these are things that we need to do definitely in government health programs. So there are three areas that I think that we should focus on. The first is Medicaid improper payments. In 2020, we had the global pandemic, tens of thousands of people were dying every day, and Congress implemented continuous Medicaid coverage, thinking that, if you're going to potentially have COVID and need hospitalization, coverage shouldn't be the issue. In 2023, states started redetermination for 20 million beneficiaries. CMS noted in 2022 that 76% of improper payments were due to eligibility. That's $61 billion a year. Now, I looked this up, and Medicaid eligibility requirements are codified in statute with little discretion. So if you think about it, redetermination, and then on the other side, initial eligibility assessments are two sides of the same process. We should actually look to automate benefits eligibility. We might have to have human review first, followed by an auditing period, and then a move towards fully autonomous review. With the simple principle being, if you're entitled to Medicaid benefits, you should be able to get them, and if you are not entitled to Medicaid benefits, you should not be on Medicaid. The second area I'd focus on is Medicare Advantage diagnosis coding, which I think we've all seen the Wall Street Journal articles and the large plethora of news about this marketplace. So if you think about it, in fee-for-service Medicare, it's like running a pizza shop. You're paid if you make more pizzas. If you make a slightly fancier pizza, you're also paid a little bit more. In Medicare Advantage, it's a bit different. You get risk-adjusted capitated payment, or a population-based payment with the risk adjustment from diagnosis coding. That way, if plans take care of sick people, they get paid more. If they take care of healthier people, they get paid less. It's no surprise that across these two programs that coding intensity is different. Coding intensity has three components. One is fraudulent coding. The DOJ picks you up in a black car and takes you to jail. Two is upcoding, subject to debate, but likely no. And the third is sort of clinically appropriate coding intensity, better communication about diagnostic specificity or severity. So we've sort of studied this problem for 2 decades. You can pick your favorite health policy analyst, economist, actuary, committee, or commission, and you can get different numbers. No one has measured those three components. The research has shown that it varies across plans. I would argue that if we have predictive typing and autocorrect on our iPhones, we can automate diagnosis coding across the Medicare program. Do we want doctors spending time with patients, or do we want them doing diagnosis coding for whether you have CKD, chronic kidney disease, stage 3A or 3B? I think we can all agree that we want doctors taking care of patients. And so if we automate that, we will eliminate coding disparities across both programs, increase trust, eliminate the need for chart reviews and health risk assessments, and eliminate the wastage of both physician times and government payments. And so I would say that for Medicare Advantage, we should focus on solving problems for Americans instead of measuring them. And then the last area I want to talk about is prior authorizations. We spend an estimated $265 billion in the healthcare industry on administrative costs. Depending upon who you ask, prior authorization can be an appropriate tool to steer care, or it can be an inappropriate tool to delay care, increase costs, decrease access. And you'll sit around, you'll have stakeholders on either side showing up, telling you one thing or the other. We've also talked about this for probably longer than I have been alive. So I would say that we should start with process reform, fix the process. So let's put the fax machine lobby out of their misery. Same for PDF submission, et cetera. We should use CMS and ONC to drive automation of data submission and have it be built directly into electronic health records. So I think we have a lot of opportunity to practically make government more efficient, reduce waste, and also make the delivery system better. And thank you for the time.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Mr. Schultz.
Chairman Schweikert, distinguished members of the Joint Economic Committee. Thanks for the opportunity to be here to discuss how artificial intelligence can transform government efficiency. America leads the world in advanced AI technologies. Private companies are rapidly deploying these tools to boost productivity and eliminate waste. But our government is only beginning to tap their potential. Of the 2,100 AI use cases identified in January of this year across 41 US federal agencies, I could only identify 17 operational systems that directly target fraud, waste, and abuse. And most of these are on a small scale. This represents both a challenge and an extraordinary opportunity. The Trump administration has recognized this. Just last week, the Office of Management and Budget issued 2 detailed memos that highlight these benefits and set forth a path both for federal government use and the procurement of AI technologies. Consider the staggering costs of fraud. We've already heard some of these numbers, and the federal agencies reported $162 billion in improper payments last year alone across 68 programs, with Medicare and Medicaid accounting for $85 billion of that. And GAO has estimated in the past that an annual fraud loss of potentially as high as $521 billion. That's potentially $500 billion of taxpayer money each year that never reach its intended purpose. AI technologies offer some powerful solutions. We hear a lot about large language models and chatbots, but I'll talk about a few specific tools that I think have great application here, and then 2 specific areas in which 2 broad areas of government in which they have some applicability. Again, the point here is that these are well deployed in the private sector and could be used in the government. So anomaly detection is a technology that allows you to quickly spot unusual activities by learning what constitute normal behavior and then identifying abnormal behavior. Financial institutions like HSBC have found that this approach identifies 2 to 4 times more financial crime with 60% fewer false positives. Natural language processing, of which LLMs are one type of application, can digest mountains of text documents, emails, and support tickets far faster than humans. This technology can streamline compliance, enhance customer service, and can reveal fraud that's hidden in mass amounts of text. Robotic process automation uses software bots to handle routine tasks. It often is used to connect legacy systems, of which obviously government institutions have many. And businesses that implement this see an average efficiency gain of up to 30% while reducing processing errors by 20 to 40%. And then finally, the last category of technology, although there's many others, graph analytics map relationships that entities have across a bunch of different systems. And so insurers right now use graph analytics to identify fraud rings and coordinated abuse that you could not find if you were only looking at a single system at a time. So these technologies offer tremendous potential across government, but let me give you 2 critical areas where I think they could offer some real specific benefits. So in benefits administration, obviously I mentioned Medicare and Medicaid, but many other areas of benefits. AI can swiftly identify fraudulent claims while speeding service to legitimate beneficiaries. They can verify documentation, automate eligibility verification, and help agencies forecast their needs to optimize resource allocation. And then in procurement and contracting, these tools can flag high-risk vendors and contracts before the money goes out the door. They can detect vendor collusion And they can automate repetitive procurement tasks, streamlining these functions both for the contractors and the government agencies that rely on them. Now, the path forward here is going to require updating some legacy systems, safeguarding data privacy, and addressing some important policy considerations. But the potential benefits are profound. And that's why when I look at AI's capabilities in this space, I don't see just a futuristic vision. I see there's practical, proven technologies that are already transforming private industry that could immediately strengthen government operations. Implementing these solutions means ensuring public funds reach their intended purposes. It means faster, more transparent services for citizens, and it means substantial savings that could be redirected to higher priority needs or returned to taxpayers. The question before us is not whether AI can improve government efficiency. The evidence from the private sector is overwhelming that it can. The question is whether we have the vision and the commitment to embrace these innovations for the benefit of all Americans. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Good afternoon, Chairman Schweikert, Ranking Member Hassan, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss how technology can improve government efficiency and reduce waste, fraud, and abuse. I serve as the Executive Director for the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, or CIGI, the membership organization for more than 70 federal IGs. The IG community has a nearly 50-year history of conducting effective government oversight and detecting and preventing waste, fraud, and abuse. The Inspector General Act of 1978 established IGs and empowered them to provide independent, objective, and impartial oversight of agency programs and operations. IGs have a dual reporting responsibility, reporting to both their agency head and to Congress. We have a long-standing relationship with Congress and a shared goal of ensuring that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and effectively and that government benefits are administered correctly. IG findings are based on facts and applicable law and guided by OIG standards. Trained auditors, investigators, inspectors, evaluators, IT specialists, and attorneys work every day to promote efficient and effective government operations. In fiscal year 2024, the IG community collectively totaled over $71 billion in audit and investigative accomplishments, generating a return of about $18 for every $1 invested in OIGs. For the government to see the full value of this oversight, agencies must take action to resolve OIG recommendations. There are currently over 14,000 unimplemented OIG recommendations, many of them related to improper payments. If implemented, such actions would improve payment integrity across dozens of federal programs. For example, the Department of Labor OIG identified over $45 billion in potentially fraudulent pandemic unemployment benefits, and the OIG has engaged the department in resolving these high-risk payments. However, there are still outstanding recommendations in this area. While all fraud is an improper payment, not all improper payments are fraudulent. Other common causes include administrative mistakes, recipient self-reporting issues, and policy limitations. For instance, the Social Security Administration OIG estimated over $7 billion in supplemental security income errors because SSA did not follow policies or use all available tools to prevent, detect, and recover overpayments. SSA OIG has made several recommendations to reduce and collect the overpayments, but the recommendations have not yet been resolved. The use of technology is critical to the IG community's oversight work, and IGs have significant experience leveraging data analytics and artificial intelligence. While these tools do not replace investigative or audit work, they enhance IG's ability to identify anomalies for further review. Last year, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration leveraged data analytics to help the IRS prevent $3.5 billion in potentially improper employee retention credits and sick and family leave credits. TIGTA notified IRS officials of the scheme, who then put controls in place to guard against similar fraudulent claims. The Postal Service OIG uses data-driven insights to analyze millions of customer complaints to recognize trends and identify potential mail delivery or theft issues. And the Office of Personnel Management OIG is using machine learning to inform which health plans the OIG should audit in the Federal Employee Health Benefits Program. To continue our effective oversight efforts and improve payment integrity, sustained access to agency data and analytics resources are critical. The IG community's top legislative priority is the establishment of a permanent, scalable data analytics platform to aid OIGs in detecting and preventing fraud and improper payments. In 2021, Congress provided CIGI's Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, or the PRAC, with the authority and funding to create a data analytics center. The result was the Pandemic Analytics Center for Excellence, or the PACE. The PACE has proven to be successful in identifying improper payments and fraud in pandemic programs. In one recent case, the PACE helped an OIG develop risk models to review some 2,400 pension plans, which led to the recovery of over $165 million. This recovery for taxpayers far exceeds the $120 million that Congress appropriated for the PRAC to operate for the last 5 years. However, with the PRAC scheduled to sunset on September 30th, 2025, the IG community urges Congress to sustain the PRAC and the PACE's data analytics capabilities. Last month, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform advanced legislation to sustain the PRAC and its capabilities, which we support. We look forward to working with Congress on this important reform to ensure the IG community is equipped with advanced technology and data analytics tools. In conclusion, the federal IG community remains committed to conducting effective program oversight, making recommendations that can improve government efficiency, and leveraging analytics and AI-supported tools in its efforts. Thank you again for inviting me to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for all of you. Because I have hours of questions, I'm going to go at the very end. Senator Schmidt, you get to start with questions.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this this hearing. I think some of the recent findings from DOGE, I think, has put this even more up front in the public consciousness. And there's a lot of great work that's happened before. And I'm not going to go through. I was going to talk about, you know, the money that's sent overseas for Guatemalan sex changes and DEI in Burma, but I've done floor speeches about that. I really want to use the time that I have with asking some questions that I can't imagine there's a ton of disagreement in as far as trying to understand how we're at where we're at. So, Dr. Miller, you brought this up in the healthcare space. I think one of the great frustrations for policymakers is that it just the enormity of some of the problems that exist are so huge that sometimes I think that inhibits people's ability to tackle them effectively. What do you think? So you've had some great recommendations about some things that could happen, and whether it's coding or finding fraud on the front end or the back end in a much more meaningful way. It feels like, as you said, you've been having this discussion longer than you've been alive. I can relate to that. What is missing? Like, we know what the problem is. Recommendations are made, and I want to ask you this question too. What's the disconnect? Like, how are the controls not actually put in place? How does this keep happening? Why isn't, in DOGE, anyway, I'm going to stop talking and let you answer the question.
So 2 reasons. One is whether it's fraud or an improper payment, that's someone's revenue, and that person who has revenue doesn't like it when you take their revenue away. So that's a political issue. After that, there's the operational issue, which is often we measure the problem, we issue a nice report, write a nice paper, and then we don't get the agency wheels going to address it. So we need to have oversight, public attention, and energy directed at getting the agencies to execute an operational plan. If they don't have an operational plan, have an operational plan. For example, we know that there's often fraud in procedures, and if a procedure takes 2 hours and you bill 20 of them in a day, that's clearly not possible. We should have prepayment claims editing in Medicare and Medicaid to prevent that from happening. We don't. So I would say aggressive and assertive oversight over agencies for what are the operational steps that they're going to do, and then continued oversight to make sure that they execute on those steps.
So are AI, because it's subject to the hearing, are AI tools being used currently outside of DOGE, right? Because they're looking under the hood. Are those sort of tools being used effectively currently in these agencies?
I would say no.
Right. That's, I think, the right answer. I wanted to ask you, so you've also talked about instances where recommendations were made. In some, like the PACE sort of oversight. You talked about how that was effective. Maybe that's the model. I don't know exactly, but what is the disconnect? Is it that Congress isn't calling these people in enough? Is it that if it's not, there's not a point person within the agencies that are actually responsible for this? How would you diagnose the problem to be able to fix?
I think Dr. Miller said it well, that there's a plethora of information out there. There's recommendations that agencies can implement, and where Congress can help is increasing transparency and visibility of those recommendations and talking directly to the agency. What's prohibiting you from implementing it? Is it a resource issue? Is it a time issue? Is it a need to continue customer service and it's just trying to implement these implementations is holding us back? I think the information is there. It's understanding what's holding the agency back.
Are there any other, obviously there's the power of the purse and there's the appropriations process. Are there any other, as you guys have found, any of you, are there any other hammers that are out there that would actually hold some of these folks their feet to the fire to actually implement these things?
I might flag something quickly from the OMB guidance that just came out last week. One of the things that they recommend on AI implementation within agencies is that the responsibility for addressing and owning the risk be on the person who is responsible for the mission of the process that AI is being deployed for. And so that type of personal accountability, where there has to be somebody actually signing off and owning the decision, I think is the sort of thing that keeps new technologies that are coming in under the right amount of scrutiny and analysis. And so I don't know that how you retrofit that, but for new technologies, I think that's a good approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you all for your testimony. I caught most of Mr. Canarsa's, and I'm sorry I missed yours, but I want to start with a few questions. Mr. Canarsa, inspectors general play a key role in identifying and rooting out fraud across the federal government. As part of their efforts, they often encounter barriers when they try to work together across agencies and share data that could prevent fraud. For instance, an inspector general at one agency might not have the staff or time needed to access data on fraud that's stored at multiple other agencies. I know that your organization wants to establish some centralized data analytics capacity that the investigators could use to further detect and prevent fraud across the government. So this is a two-part question. One, what are some of the most promising examples of how inspectors general are already sharing data to prevent fraud, such as by working together to stop criminals who have multiple shell companies that have been defrauding our small business loan programs? So that just, why don't we start with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for the question. And Senator Hassan, I wanted to thank you for working with Senator Joni Ernst on the IG Senate caucus.
Yeah.
We appreciate your efforts and look forward
Thank
to
you.
working with you both on that. To the question, several examples going back to the start of the pandemic, and want to give credit to the Small Business Administration OIG and Department of Labor OIG, who had oversight over the PPP and the EIDL programs, and then the Pandemic Unemployment Insurance Program, which obviously at that time it was a need for those funds to go out at the time,
Right.
but it left it ripe for fraud. And where the PRAC came in and helped was to identify a lot of those suspicious claims that were clustered, and which led
Right.
to, in those cases, groups that were putting in multiple claims, because they saw some go through, so they kept going
Right.
for them. In both instances, both SBA OIG and DOL OIG have successful fraud investigations to the tune of millions of dollars that were found, and prosecutions continued from there.
Great. And what can Congress do to make sure that sort of cooperation gets easier while also protecting people's privacy?
I think, as I mentioned, the expanding and enhancing the potential of the PRAC's pace. If we can do what they've shown in just the pandemic realm programs, if we can do that across federal programs, make it easier for, as you mentioned, for agencies and their OIGs to match in a central location, again, with all privacy protections and considerations in place, that just makes it easier to go to one stop instead of each agency trying to make these agreements one-off.
Right. And in my experience as a governor, one of the hard things is finding actual staff and resources to focus on this, so that if we can share in the effort, makes a big difference. Dr. Thomas, Your position as the chief scientist of the Government Accountability Office gives you a good vantage point to see how the federal government deploys technology, especially when it comes to strengthening government effectiveness and saving taxpayer dollars. What are areas of the government that have the highest potential for reducing waste, fraud, and abuse through the deployment of cutting-edge technology, including AI?
Yeah, so if you look at our government-wide fraud report that we just
Yeah.
put out, we talk about the different programs that there's a range that goes with it. So I think as earlier was mentioned, it's $500 billion. That's the high range. Those are for high-risk programs. Think about like COVID-style programs. Right. The lower range is really analyzing the lower-risk programs. We did a modeling exercise using Monte Carlo to understand what that range looks like. Essentially, what it comes down to. Additional transparency, obviously within the payment systems, and making sure that the agencies are using the analytics and sharing the use of that analytics, as well as what has already been talked about earlier that we support is setting up a center of excellence that supports the fraud world, so that across the government, all of these agencies can work together, can share data that matters, and share tools that identify those flags of potential fraud. The important part, though, that I want to make sure we don't miss is that the analysts play a critical role.
Yeah.
The analytics only identifies a flag that something might be associated with fraud. It is the analysts themselves that actually goes and does the investigation.
Right, that's very helpful. I have lots more questions too, but why don't I yield back and then we can keep going.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you all for being here today. I wanted to point out that in my district, we're experiencing a real problem with Treasury checks being stolen. And obviously, this is not something that's unique to my district, although it's been heavily impacted. As you've mentioned, the GAO estimates a total of $162 billion in improper payments in fiscal year 2025 and more than $2.8 trillion since 2003. So you have the issue of improper payments, and then you have those of the fraudsters and the folks that are actually physically stealing these checks, washing them, reissuing them, and cashing them. And in my district alone, we've had roughly 400 constituent cases of stolen federal checks that total $5.4 million. So this is a big issue, right? If we multiply that by all the members and the senators in this body, you're talking about a substantial amount of money. And I would love to hear from any of you on what you think could be a viable solution. Obviously, moving people to direct deposit is one thing we're looking at. The president did issue an executive order. We recently passed legislation out of the House to require IRS to reissue payments if the consumer wants or the taxpayer wants via direct deposit. Maybe tracking checks so we know what point these checks are being stolen. And then AI, as you're discussing today, can come in handy as well. So we'd love to hear from any of you on any ideas or solutions you may have or what you've seen work potentially in the private sector as it relates to financial crimes that could be applied here.
Yeah, so I don't have an answer for the direct question of what do you do about washing checks, Congresswoman, but I appreciate the question. Within how do you, so we're talking about really fraud, because fraud is where you get into the point of someone's purposely trying to defraud the government, which is what this is about. Analytics certainly and AI could certainly help this by tracking the actual payment beyond just the check, making sure that the individual is actually receiving it, providing some sort of methodology to check back. Those are types of things that the private sector uses that can then be repurposed potentially for the government. It is not an area that we have looked into, though, at GAO.
Okay. Mr. Chilson?
So obviously taking the middleman, taking the middleman out, which is the mailbox, I guess, and doing direct deposit makes a ton of sense. It's not really an AI approach. It is obviously an established technology, but there you're relying on the commercial sector, which does have a lot of capabilities to identify, when electronic payments are working and when they're not. Electronic payments are not fraud-free, but the companies have spent a lot of money to identify how to make sure that money moves properly between accounts. And so I do think that the more you can move people to that type of approach, the better it will be.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Thomas, in your testimony, you highlighted the need to extend the Social Security Administration's authority to share its full death data master file with the Department of Treasury, which is set to expire next year. And I would like to know your thoughts on how much this has recovered, how successful it's been. It's my understanding it's about $31 million in payments. And can you highlight any other multi-agency data sharing that needs to take place?
I would love to, but I want to make sure I give you exact information. So if you don't mind, I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, no problem. And then one more question for you. What is the most significant barrier stopping the federal government from implementing these advanced AI technologies to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse?
Yeah, so I think there's two areas that I want to particularly highlight, and this is one of the biggest questions out there. And the first one I think we've already talked about quite a bit, which is just the partitioning of data, trying to make sure that data is available to the anti-fraud community so that we can track people across the different parts of the government and track the information so that it can actually be used for large types of analytic models. The second is actually just as important and probably needs to happen before the first, which is a foundational data that is validated, that shows these are actual indicators of fraud or improper payments. We can't get into a habit of marking something that is not fraud and making a guess at it. We do actually need to go through the entire process with the IGs to make sure that something has actually been validated and put that into kind of a gold standard data set. That is going to produce the best outcome for our analytical tools.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And Senator Hassan, thanks for holding this together. And thank you all very much for being here. I really, really appreciate this. And I'm so many questions I want to ask, but let me just start with, we've watched Elon Musk and his DOGE team recently go after waste, fraud, and abuse. And you've laid out the case very strongly for why that is necessary. These many hundreds of millions of billions of dollars out there. Let me just point out, though, that most of this seems to be improper payments or folks stealing checks. I'm not quite sure the connection between the huge amount of waste, fraud, and abuse you've identified and firing half the people at the Department of Education, laying off 20,000 people at HHS, getting rid of the U.S. Institute of Peace, firing all probationary employees. None of that seems to address the waste, fraud, and abuse that you are trying to find very constructive, honest ways to deal with. And I still remember fondly, I just figured out it was 50 years ago that the little family business where we were doing all of our records by hand with a pencil and an 10-key adder. And on December 1st, 1975, I moved it to the internet. It was a keyboard the size of an electric thing online, so it took 5 minutes between entries when you push the key. However, it made possible a degree of productivity increase that's just unprecedented, including much, much less waste, fraud, and abuse. So Chairman Schweiker and I share the vision of what this could do to federal government and to Medicare and to Medicaid to be able to bring that technology here. In the meantime, I'm very concerned about DOGE, which I want to succeed, but the use of unapproved technologies without sufficient oversight, the use in high-impact areas like federal employees' employment status, and the lack of basic security for non-government data sets, instead profiteering off of sharing data with commercial models. I prepared a letter with many of my Democratic colleagues, which are going to send to OMB. And Mr. Chair, I'd love to submit that letter to the record. And then ask Mr. Chilson, in your testimony, you talked briefly about things like audit standards, upfront training, and investment. Which existing laws and specific new policies would you promote to encourage the responsible adoption of AI?
So I'm most familiar with regulation in the commercial sector, having spent time at the Federal Trade Commission. But I am familiar with, at the FTC, some of the practices of every privacy officer that is within agencies. And I think the recent OMB memos, again, if you haven't seen those, I think they offer a lot of the safeguards that should be undertaken as an agency adopts technology into use in pursuit of its mission. These memorandum replace some Biden-era memorandum, but they cover a lot of the same area, maybe with a slightly different focus, one that more encourages the adoption of this technology as in pursuit of the mission, but offers the same sorts of guardrails in some cases that will help make sure that this protects privacy, that it pursues the mission of the agency, and that it's effective. And so some of those principles in there, I think, are a good start, although they're, they're guidance, not regulation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gilson. And Dr. Miller, one of my favorite agencies in Congress is AHRQ, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, because their mission is all about how to deliver healthcare more effectively and not spending money on costly, wasteful treatments. Someone once told me that if you want to look at efficiency in federal government, AHRQ is the poster child. And it's one of the key agencies that looks at over the $4.5 trillion spent annually on healthcare. And it's even more important when you think about artificial intelligence, applying it. But again, guess what? Much of AHRQ was gutted by the reduction in force at HHS last week. And the people that we need to do HI for healthcare were actually fired. The RIF apparently eliminated much of the staff in the Office of the Chief Information Officer, and then they attempted to relocate most of the executive staff to like the Indian Health Service. I'm sure they thought they could outsource the IT services, but you need people on the ground that understand tech policy and cybersecurity. What would you do to make sure that we have the folks in the agencies that can make sure that we have the expertise to advance AI adoption?
Thank you. I think AHRQ is more of a research and a research contract organization as opposed to a regulations or operations organization. So I would say that CMS, which is functioning as the payer and the regulator of the private payers executing the public program, needs the digital health, AI, machine learning expertise built into CMS, into each of the centers, whether it's the Center for Medicaid, whether it's the Center for Medicaid and CHIP Services. I don't think that that is AHRQ's primary function, historically.
Okay, well, great. Well, my time's up, but thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing and for your work on this committee. Today, I'm afraid that rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse has become divisive here in Washington, but it's exactly what the Americans want us to address. Before this year, rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse was actually a bipartisan endeavor and talked about and had broad support. It appears that now there's a number of lawmakers, bureaucrats, and media that actively support the status quo, which in essence is on the side of allowing the waste and fraud to continue. We've had decades of Inspector General reports that have outlined the reckless misuse of government funds with little or no appetite to address that. And you mentioned that earlier in today in terms of that there was the status quo, or the push on the status quo was to resist the loss of recipients of the payments that were making through that. The new administration is shattering some of the status quo and tackling the problem with their directive that they got from the American people last November. As the chair of the Social Security Subcommittee here in the House, I want to just highlight that for everybody in America, that every dollar that's saved by eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse is a dollar that can go towards benefits to seniors that have earned them, or for benefits in other programs as well. Typically, things have been slow here in Washington to change with just the bureaucracy and the size of the government. If you contrast that with the private sector, U.S. businesses, if they don't innovate and adapt, they die. In D.C., as Ronald Reagan once quote, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on Earth. Some of the advancements that we're seeing with artificial intelligence are already disrupting industries throughout the country, whether it's in medical field, manufacturing, or technology. The federal government needs to be looking at ways that we can actually be more responsible and use AI. Dr. Thomas, based on data from 2018 to 2022, GAO estimates that aggregate fraud was between $233 billion to $521 billion each year. On the low end, that means that the government's lost more than $1 trillion in a 5-year period, and maybe as much as $2.6 trillion. It's unfathomable that people be against finding and eliminating this blatant theft of taxpayer dollars. So what, from a GAO's perspective, are you doing to implement machine learning and data analytics to help reduce that fraud, and how other federal agencies can work to get that number closer to zero?
So within our data analytics programs, we are developing tools for our analysts to identify the flags that I mentioned earlier of what are potential indicators of fraudulent events, fraudulent programs, fraudulent payments, and making those tools potentially available to the rest of the agencies to use. And we continue to work with the agencies to help them adopt the recommendations that we put forth in each of our reports. When we talk about fraud across the government as an estimate, that comes from information that we receive from each of the agencies. And as we work with that, we develop a whole bunch of recommendations. And we follow up with them, and adopting those recommendations we believe will bring down the risk of fraud. Additionally, we want them to use our fraud risk framework that we have implemented and shared with them that allows them to look at programs and identify where potential fraud could exist if that program is implemented in that particular way, and make adjustments to try to, just as you talked about, stop fraud from happening before it happens.
Thank you. Mr. Chilson, I think when we talk about rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, sometimes a false narrative gets promoted that the federal government is taking away benefits from Americans that have rightfully deserved those. And trying to alleviate some of this fear-mongering, can you help dispel some of those fears and explain how AI can more effectively target those bad actors, target the improper payments to ensure that our government programs provide the resources to the right beneficiaries?
Well, accuracy is really important, and what we've seen in the private sector is that these tools can help both eliminate fraud, but also serve the people who are rightfully getting benefits more quickly and accurately. And so I do think that we have opportunities in this space. The financial sector does this all the time. And what it's found is that, you may remember you got lots of calls, maybe 5 years ago, you got lots of calls anytime you went on a trip with your credit card. Well, now they can identify when there's fraud with a lot fewer of those false positives. And that's a convenience to the people who are getting benefits, as well as those who are, as well as addressing the people who are fraud.
Well, thank you. And I've run out of time like so many others. We have so many questions I could ask each of you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair Schweikert and Ranking Member Hassan. Really a privilege to be on this committee and to be part of today's hearing on this very important topic. Obviously, when we talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, we all want to reduce this. We all want to eliminate as much as possible. Ensuring that taxpayer dollars are spent effectively is part of our mission here in Congress. And so very excited to hear about the possibility of what we can do to try to rein in some of these wasteful actions. Every year, the federal government disperses trillions of dollars, as we know, across thousands of different programs, healthcare, infrastructure, defense, disaster relief, and on and on and on. And of course, with this level of spending comes the inevitable challenge of effectively managing waste, fraud, and abuse. Historically, large organizations, including, I just want to note, private companies, big corporations, have all had to deal with this problem of waste, fraud, and abuse, and they've done so through manual audits and control systems. But the rapid development of technology over the past few years, including AI, as we're talking about today, give us a really transformative opportunity to try to run government better. We're talking about some very, very exciting potential here. That being said, I think it's important to also recognize that technological advances like AI are only going to be as good as the parameters we set for them. And these are fundamentally normative parameters we're talking about. So when we think about efficiency, we need to talk about the goals and timelines that are our mission here. Are we talking about just reducing costs? Are there other goals involved? What's the timeline we're looking at for efficiency or cost cutting? Is it immediate? Is it a year out? Is it 10 years out? All of these things matter, and I just want to give you an example here. When we talk about Social Security, despite a number of really bad and false and debunked claims about Social Security fraud recently, we know that Social Security has been a remarkably effective program and an efficient program. A very, very low percentage of fraud, always under 1% under any analysis, a very low percentage of overhead spent on that, less than 0.5% of the total program is spent on personnel and overhead. And until this year, the Social Security Administration was renowned for its remarkable ability to deliver trillions of dollars of checks consistently, securely, and on time. Are there ways to cut back on Social Security spending? Yes, of course. And we've seen Elon Musk and DOGE do just that, attempting to fire 12% of the Social Security workforce. This has, though, led to lots of reports of delayed and missing checks, difficulty for seniors, including ones that have called my office, trying to find personnel that will deal with their problems with Social Security. So the question, of course, is what do we mean by efficiency when it comes to Social Security? Are we talking just about cutting costs? Are we talking about cutting costs now? Or are we talking about other goals here? I would submit to you that I think what Social Security has done is get checks out to people. That is its mission. And so, again, when we think about AI and how it can improve efficiency across different agencies, those goals, the time frame that we're talking about are important. I want to give you another example. I represent a vibrant life sciences industry, and I've heard a lot of growing concerns about the major cuts that have been made to staffing at the Food and Drug Administration, and that these will lead to longer approval times for new drugs and devices. And in fact, if you look at the FDA structure, these staff are actually paid for largely by user fees from the companies seeking approval. So actually the cost, other than if you're looking at the very immediate time frame, is zero. But if your priority is to look for immediate spending cuts, the administration, the terminations of lots of FDA staff might make some sense, but beyond just the immediate present, it doesn't make any sense. And if you're looking at any other goals, including FDA approval, rapid approval of drugs and devices, these cuts look very inefficient. So I guess my first question to you all, maybe I'll start with Dr. Thomas. When we talk about efficiency, what time frame should we be looking at? Very short term or long term?
Well, we look at both. So we're looking at short-term efficiencies or where we've identified potential areas of concern and made recommendations of how to improve those areas of concern. And then, of course, with the long-term one, that gets into the system that you're using, a systemic challenge. And we identify opportunities there as well, sometimes as matters for Congress, sometimes as areas of attention for the executive branch. So we look at both of them.
I want to ask Mr. Canarsa that same question.
Yeah, that was a good answer. OIGs are in the same business. There are short-term benefits and then, project out for the longer term for those bigger efficiencies that you're talking about.
And I want to follow up with one last question for you, Mr. Canarsa. Do you think that inspector generals, oversight, transparency, disclosure, that these are important things that we need to have real efficiency in government, whether we're using AI or not?
Absolutely. That's what the IG Act was built on, was the value of independent, transparent, nonpartisan oversight, just so that the facts can be presented as to how to improve these agencies and their programs.
So just to be clear, firing 19 inspectors general would not improve efficiency?
I should say that the OIGs themselves didn't go away. Their leadership was removed. So we're proud that the staff that's there and the leadership that has stepped up has kept that oversight going.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Dr. Thomas, I wanted to, you involved with government accountability officers in charge of audits, correct?
I'm sorry, say that
You
again.
you involved with audits of government, right?
Yes,
As
we
part
are.
of, yes, okay. So I'm a former auditor, spent over a decade auditing publicly traded and private companies. Do you think it's common sense to have authorization of transactions? That all transactions that government disperses should be properly approved and authorized?
Yes, it makes sense.
That's right. That's what DOGE is trying to do. They came and say, okay, we need to make sure that transactions are properly authorized. This is accounting 101. Do you think it's proper to have justification transaction? What is the reason this transaction was disbursed? Is it based on some invoice, appropriations, and have all of this process? This is its common sense accounting.
Yes, we support the appropriate
Okay,
documentation.
so that's right. You have documentation. That's what DOGE is trying to do. Do you think it's appropriate to have automated controls and matching of databases to make sure that the things when we disburse transactions have some way of controls, and including maybe some automated controls? Do you think that's something that government should do more?
That is a much more challenging question. The automation is entirely dependent upon the algorithm.
But do you think we should have controls with manual matching or automated that matching controls to match data to have some controls in transaction? Do we have to have controls? You support having controls.
I thought your question was about automation. I apologize.
That could be automated controls, could be manual. But do you support controls, right? Do you think you in charge of automation, do you think it's sufficient technology to have more automated controls?
I don't know if we have an answer to that right now.
You don't know? So we studied a lot of controls, 20 years ago when I was in audit, private companies were able to do this. We actually did artificial intelligence and continuous auditing done in private companies. Do you think government cannot do it? You're in charge of technology and innovation. How far we need to go? How many decades behind you think government should be from the real world?
Within the science domain, which is my area of responsibility, The science right now does not support artificial intelligence that is deterministic. And that is the challenge that exists for using artificial intelligence for deterministic choices like you're talking about.
No, but just for simple transactions, we're using just to identify fraud because that actually gives more efficiency. Don't you agree that actually continuous auditing and using more automation would detect and prevent fraud more efficiently than manually?
We do continuous auditing is a practice that we also enjoy.
Right, and I think that's what DOGE is trying to do. So they try to improve control environment to avoid to have, so I'm not sure why there is an argument even about that if we try to improve. It seems like everyone wants to have efficiency and better auditing, that the things go to proper causes. And we need to simplify. Don't you agree we need to simplify our billing?
So your first statement was about the actual technology, and that
Right.
is what I'm here to talk about.
Okay.
We do not agree across everybody that the existing AI technology can make error-free determination in an entirely automated
Well, there is no one can do error-free, but that could be tools and mechanisms to help us, to be able to detect fraud and have more controls. Yes. There is no proof, but it's less likely to have some set up system. So I think that's extremely important because we're spending a lot of money in healthcare, but we need to make sure that it's actually bring value. But there is a different conversation. It's a little bit broader, not just fraud that we need to make sure that not happening, but abuse of the laws because Congress write very broad laws. And unfortunately, this issue became very partisan, where it used to be overbilling by large hospitals of Medicare was a bipartisan issue, or abuses in Medicare Advantage was a bipartisan issue, or in Medicaid, Vice President Biden at the time was calling Ponzi scheme some of the, gimmicks, that hospitals play with provider taxes. And suddenly it became very partisan, and now we cannot have a discussion about the fraud and abuse because everyone wants here to make sure that people have better benefits and better health care. And because we're spending so much money on healthcare, but we are not getting outcomes and for value. And Dr. Miller, you as a doctor here, what do you think would be key issues that we should address to improve healthcare value?
I would say automation to eliminate improper payments, so that way you're either saving money or you're redirecting that money towards other items and services for beneficiaries.
Okay, so it seems like we should be much more bipartisan support and agreement on this issue and not a partisan issue because we want Americans to be healthy because a healthy nations, that's the only nations can be strong. But thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. We have 11 minutes on a vote that's been called. You're comfortable with, and we may have to all run to votes. And this was an hour or two of questions. All right,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here, and delighted to be at my first JAC meeting. So, Dr. Thomas, I want to nerd out with you a little bit. Before coming to Congress 6.5 years ago, I was in the energy business, and I built an AI tool for our company because the single biggest source of profit variance we always had was revenue variance. And the reason why our revenue variance was so high was because our customers, even though they assured us that they knew what their energy loads would be next year, they actually were really bad at predicting them. And so I built a model to go and pull in economic data and weather data and all sorts of other stuff. And the good news, I'm very proud of this, is we cut our revenue variance by 90%. The bad news is I got all of this precision and no fundamental knowledge of what was going on. I had very good curve-fitting data, but lost knowledge. I remember saying this to my head of engineering at the time, and he said, in his wise way, that's the story of every advance in technology. We get more precision at the expense of knowledge. My GPS tells me where I am, but I don't remember how I got here. I asked that in the context of how you're thinking about how to design, what do you optimize to? I mean, it's one thing to say we all want efficiency, of course. That's, mom and apple pie. But in a business context, I knew what I was optimizing to. In a political context, and you can take any of these that you want, but it strikes me that there's 4 things that I don't know how to do the math. How do you deal with political trade-offs? If we're going to design a tariff policy, let's say, that's going to balance the interests of exporters and importers, that's a political question. That's not a math question. How do you deal with the fact that the federal government has unlimited downside exposure? In my company, I was protected, my floor was protected by the bankruptcy code, our insurance protocols. the government has to be there in the worst possible case scenario, which means we need to keep resources around that are not used most of the time. How do you think about that? How do you deal with economic impacts outside of the government's balance sheet? We could save a ton of money if we defunded the police, right? I don't think anybody would suggest that that would be societally beneficial, whether it's a cop on the beat or, someone at the SEC. But we know that we can save money for the government if we do that. And then, of course, how do you deal with non-economic issues? Fermilab is right outside my district. I don't know what the return is on basic investment, but I'm sure glad we do it. On the other side of my brain, Muddy Waters used to live in my district. If FDR hadn't funded the WPA, hadn't sent Alan Lomax down south, we wouldn't have found Muddy Waters, and we probably wouldn't have the Rolling Stones. We could have saved money. So, when you design these algorithms, do you have classes of problems that you simply don't ask? Or how do you think about those when you're trying to optimize for efficiency?
Yeah, that is a very tricky question. And we are keenly aware, and you'll notice in my written testimony, we talk about if you go too far in one direction, you certainly over impact small business and individuals. Because once you start slowing down the payment systems, people who are dependent upon the timeliness of those payment systems, who are not doing improper payments or fraudulent, they're just regular folks doing, running a business or living their lives. It causes significant, friction. And so we're trying to optimize when we do analytics to try to identify the flags we talked about. And that's why I'm such an advocate of high quality data. And you've been through this experience, high quality data matters because if you don't have high quality data, it introduces additional error on top of the algorithmic error that just exists within the process that you're using to do your modeling. And so trying to balance those things. And then we actually do sit down and think through the ethical approach of it. What is the impact of a false negative? What is the impact of a false positive? Of course, at GAO, we are interested in reducing fraud to zero in theory.
So, and I know we're going to be tight on time here, but all of that makes perfect sense to me. It raises the next question: what DOGE is doing, are they only using algorithms that have gone through your sort of ethical test to run traps, or are they running algorithms outside of your process?
So we have only recently been asked to look at what DOGE is doing. And so that is.
So you don't know?
We just started. And so we're not ready to comment on that, but we're.
Okay, so to the extent DOGE is using AI tools, no one on this panel knows what they're doing. That's a flag. To anyone on the panel, is it your view that if we identify a putative relationship, some opportunity for efficiency, because when I built these algorithms in my company, I didn't get to just change our budget. I had to go to our board for approval. Is it your view that the executive branch can implement these changes right away without coming to Congress for approval? Does anybody maintain that position on this committee?
I think there are plenty of tools that, yes.
I'm just asking whether the Impoundments Act and the Rescission Control Act trump here. Because I think to Dr. Thomas's point, we can learn a lot from AI. We still need to run ethics tests on the back end. And it is an important question whether we think the executive branch can act without congressional approval to implement what they learn without even telling us what they're doing, because it sounds like we don't even know what the hell DOGE is doing.
You can answer, we're down to 5. So
okay.
It's probably time to get on. If you have time, we're going to pause the hearing. I do have one request. If we have some of the joint economic staff, and be careful, some of them are pretty smart, the PhDs. Children, Dr. Thomas, you talked about, and I'm all understand the first there, headquarters George, the AI mapping software, you call it mapping? Because in the old days, we were doing the bolt-ons, a legacy system, bolt-on, bolt-on. Now some of the AI packages, I understand, can take the feed, almost write it to modern code, analyze it, break it down. Do you have technology you can hand to him so he can stop writing me papers and reports, and we can start moving to implementation? And then Dr. Miller, if you talk to one of the two staffs, because we have multiple bills about moving AI in clean claims and those automations. we're trying to convince our brothers and sisters, particularly those with relationships to CMS, that if we got rid of the, chase and deny sort of system, and did AI match to, here's the benefits, here's the doctor's notes, AI scrubs, pay it. Help us model what the savings and efficiencies are, and I'll see you in a few minutes. How do I take your technology, your understanding of the technology, march it over to GAO, or actual agencies, have them stop sending me papers about ideas for implementation and actually implement? Because it's not 20 years ago where it took me a 2-year project and I had to hire IBM to do a bolt-on on my old bolt-on on my AS400. Seriously, I started on an AS400 one time. Why do you laugh at that? But I'm really serious about this. The ability to take data sets today and just get going on it. I thought you already had certain, I don't know if they technically qualify as AI programs, but translational programs that will take my old stuff and now it's Java, now it's whatever. How do you help it?
I don't know that GAO particularly needs my help on this. I think Dr. Thompson has it Thomas has it well under hand. But the agencies face a lot of challenges for a bunch of different reasons. I mean, they're all their own special creature, and so whether it's funding, a lot of it's expertise, but a lot of it is just the status quo of how things have happened in the past, and so they don't set up a big plan, right? And so I think demanding a sort of action plan is probably the
Is
first
there a way
step.
to standardize that action plan? Where, okay, look, has been pointed out, the cost of high-end talent, our compensation schedules is one of the reasons we can't keep them. We've already learned, whether it be the Wall Street Journal series in regards to MA, or some of the other things, sometimes the one that bathes only on occasion, but's a dropout of MIT because he was already bored, has the ability to do things in hours that would take some of us years. We've all had one of those in our lives. I'm just trying to figure out how to move away from having another hearing, another conversation, to actual implementation. A decade ago, I was positive blockchain was going to be my way to build universal databases, access hierarchies of permission. I have an expertise in blockchain node coding and design. And I'm here a decade later and it didn't go anywhere. So help me.
Yeah, it's I think it's less of a, there is obviously the technical problem of how do you provide these tools, but I think there is very much a social and political challenge here, and that's an area that I'm not a deep expert on, although I've seen changes at the Federal Trade Commission primarily. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Thomas?
Yeah, and I'll, in this instance, if you don't mind, I'll talk from my professional experience as opposed to GAO, because I don't think we have a body of work quite on this topic yet. There's two areas I think you're getting at. One is just the workforce, right? And there are very bright people who are interested in working for the government because it makes a difference, right? They're mission oriented. They don't, maybe are not, they're at some point in their career, or whether they're not after the big money or they've already done that. So that happens, because I'm one of them. I'm one of those people who've done that. But the second part is that getting the new technology into individual agencies one by one is a challenge.
Okay, so can I give you, and tell you, you're more than welcome to say I'm way over my skis and out. Okay, so I have dozens and dozens of different government entities. Mm-hmm. They all each have their own databases, their own mechanisms. Mm-hmm. If I had them basically hosted, with their own sets, their own permissions, but in a common area, could I actually have a machine learning package that first does this one, then rolls to this one, then rolls to this one, and you actually do where it actually gives you your optionality on your data sets and externality, where it's seeing abnormalities and those things.
Yeah.
And in that case, it's a central AI shop. But because we're actually heading towards a world where we're going to do some more data sharing to find out, so like we've learned with some of the Social Security databases, the death file, because it didn't have access in so many things over here, people would steal grandma's identity, but grandma hasn't been with us for a while, and they were taking out loans. And that's elementary school level coding of just sharing data. Is the concept of, you've talked about professional skill sets and staff, but could it be in a single island instead of going around to the individual agencies? Is that a?
It can be done. Now, remember, the rules for privacy of the data is defined by Congress, so that's something you can change.
But look, the Defense Department keeps much of its data in an encrypted cloud.
So yeah, we get a national security data is a little bit different.
My iPhone has an encryption chip in it. The fact of the matter is, this is more secure than any HIPAA database out there.
Yeah, but as a scientist, what you're describing is a great environment where the data is there, the analytics are there, the technology exists to create role-based permissions so that you can control who accesses what within a centralized system. The technology's there. I think there are barriers within the government. A lot of it come down to the rules that have been put into place.
Okay, am I insane? Excuse me, am I being too techno-utopian?
I think the aspiration is worth pursuing. I think that some good points have been raised that it's about empowering the agencies, with maybe, is it dedicated resources to push forward.
But in your vision, it's the talent is at the agency, and one of the conversations I've had with certain folks is saying, have create the talent, but they capture the agency's data more from a central hub.
I think my point is it's priorities, and we were talking about it briefly here, that a lot of these agencies, they're in the business of their customer delivery. They're trying to keep the business going, and it's whether it's implementing the recommendations I talked about from the OIGs, or it's pursuing these advanced tools. It's prioritizing for them what's important, what's going to deliver the greatest return.
I'm going to come back to you on that. Okay. Forgive me, but Dr. Miller is one of my favorite people, which, trust me, in this place doesn't get you much. If I came to you right now and said, give me the 3 things technology can do to change the cost and access to healthcare for the better for society, give me the 3 pieces of legislation someone like me should be trying to drive through this process, what would you do?
I'd focus on the plan admin processes, which are the 3 things that I mentioned. So the automation of Medicaid eligibility, because it's categorical and financial. There's not really discretion involved in, a lot of discretion involved in Medicaid eligibility. So move it towards automation. Require CMS to do that and have a clear timeline.
Okay, so you'd have the Medicaid eligibility, grab the state data, and CMS do the match. Would you do a match to private data?
To what data?
In Ways and Means, we've talked about certain things where we have certain earned income tax credit benefits, those things. Instead of putting them on delays for a couple months to see if you get multiple requests under the same Social Security number, if you did a match to certain commercial databases saying, oh yeah, consumption matches reported income, send them their check. Would you do a data quality bounce of a commercial database just to see if the eligibility qualifications to speed it up?
I don't think it's unreasonable. I can't say if that would be the right operational answer.
Okay.
But the idea of making the standard for Medicaid eligibility, instead of it being a paper or a manual or a fax-based process, to have it be an automated technological process, just like you log on and get into your bank account. It should be simple. The second thing I would do is I would tell CMS, you could do it through oversight, you could also do it through legislation, to move diagnosis coding across the Medicare program, not just MA, but also in fee-for-service, to an automated software.
Okay, and we actually have, because that's the one I was hoping you'd give me as number 3, because that one we have great interest in.
Because the issues about diagnosis coding, right? There's clinically appropriate diagnosis coding intensity. There's sort of the gray area, and then there's the fraud. The DOJ hauls you off to jail, and then there are of course changes that happen when beneficiaries, the same beneficiary in fee-for-service and MA, can look differently. But that's because the programs have different incentives for coding. So if you fix coding across the entire system, as opposed to in one of the programs, and you fix it at the point of delivery, that's a huge improvement.
You see, now, I need to talk to you because I need to make sure, we've been actually having a discussion on MA, what would happen if I could get some of that coding profile so I know my risk adjustment before a capitated bid.
Right.
So you're not bidding, or you're not scoring people once a bid is already, once services are already out there, but you do it in your initial bid, and therefore it changes the incentive, saying, I'm going to try to keep you healthier than spend my time trying to score you as sicker. I mean,
yeah, I would say that the answer is because the beneficiary would be coded the same or very similarly in fee-for-service versus MA, it would eliminate those incentives. Because,
okay, and number 3.
So, and number 3 would be making the prior authorization data submission process electronic. It's still like 1/4 or 1/3, I think, fax and a certain.
Okay, so universal prior auth, would you do it?
Well, I would say prior auth in Medicare and Medicaid managed care have the data submission. So I'm not even talking about the process of whether it's the same specialist reviewing that of the person who's submitting. I'm talking about the submission of data.
Okay, so that'd be different than a true clean claims model.
Right, I'm talking first order. Like, we haven't even gotten submission of data to be purely electronic and integrated into the point of care. So it should be, like, if you come and see me in clinic, or I see someone in clinic or in the hospital, and I'm typing my note, or it's my notes being dictated, then at the end of the visit, I click a button and say, yes, I want to send this to Cigna or whomever. We can't do that right now. And so that's a problem even before the other issues in prior auth.
Only because I have people screaming at me, I'm supposed to be doing another. Will you have a quick conversation, Dr. Miller, with this young man behind me? He is freaky smart, and we've been working on your number 2 as trying to understand, could we get actually the risk adjustment coding in front instead of doing it over time. So we actually, from day one, know what helps our brothers and sisters who are receiving particularly an MA benefit.
Happy to
keep them healthier. Gentlemen, I have a dozen questions I want to send you. You forgive if you get a couple notes from me. I really do want to think about, and I wish I could say it's my idea, but I have one of those people in my life who is truly a genius, and bathing is optional. And that's the one who've always thought, saying, look, you have this data and hundreds of different concerns through government. You needed to A, talk to each other, B, if it talks to each other, then you could actually do much of its mining and set design from a single location. So it's not genuinely my idea. And I need to find out, was that just a caffeinated rambling, or is it a brilliant idea? So, yeah, Dr. Thomas, before we throw the gavel.
Yeah, just at the bug in your ear, a potential model to start with is something similar to PACE, which is a centralized program for analytics to fight against fraud. And it's bringing the data together, it's bringing the analysts together. It's a starting point, something to consider.
Well, okay, you started this. Okay, but fraud analytics are not only crowdsourced in many ways, but they're living, they're constant. It's not like a single match. My understanding is the best ones, actually, it's constant, because there's constant, every day there's new inputs, there's new scams, there's new bots that, It's not just a match, good, gone, done. It's just like how many of you drive with Waze?
Yeah.
It's a living data set. And I think that's actually, it was always my blockchain model. It has to be living. And I think that becomes one of the design problems so often in government is I hire some 3 people, they're very smart, they build it, but 6 months later, everything that's in there is already out of date. It's Dr. Miller, I believe, I may have actually gotten this from you, medical knowledge doubles every 72 days.
But yeah, you're right. But you create an ecosystem similar to what exists in the cyber world, where new models and new signatures of those threats are made available to the community. As opposed to when someone discovers it, say someone discovers it in agency A, it can then be communicated to the rest of the community through something like a centralized analytics center.
Okay.
Because you're right, the fraudsters are innovative too.
Well,
and that's what we need to build a system for.
Yeah, or the brain trust, Congress comes up with another idea, throws out something, and we give you absolutely unrealistic implementation times, and in that we create the fragilities. I see a whiteboard session coming. Gentlemen, I apologize to you. You deserve so much more of our attention. But what you do is important, and thank you for helping us. And with that, we're adjourned.